Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you are well and looking forward to yet another public holiday this week alone. However, I think this is the last of the holidays and then we're going to resume everything as planned. So today I'm going to continue with the practical that we started on yesterday. And for some strange reason, I had an issue with a case sensitivity issue that I then somehow managed to fix by agreeing to change the name of my form to an uppercase and then changing back. So I actually don't know what the issue was, but the problem has been fixed, so I can run this program. So what I have done is I have copied and pasted the code that we wrote in Notepad++ yesterday into the second button, the first button for question 2. And now what we're going to do is we're going to resume with the rest of the code. So the ideal situation is we will finish the code for the rest of these 4 buttons and conclude this problem, and then we can begin a new example next week, Monday. Okay, so before I begin, I just want to apologize in advance. My neighbors have got a contractor on their property hammering away on the roof, so if you hear some hammering in the background, unfortunately I cannot negotiate with these people next door, so please just bear with me. All right, so with capturing the data, we are responsible for the input of information, and specifically the information that we are going to read in is, and then I'm just going to quickly go back to our practical question, have that open up in front of us, and you can see that we are going to read in for each and every student their student number, the surname of that student, sorry, thank you, initials of that student, and then for that current student, what is for every single subject for that student, we're going to read in the subject name, and then for each of those subjects there are a number of terms, and for each of those terms we're going to read in a number of marks. So if you take this into consideration, we will need first and foremost a for loop that goes through every single student. Then we'll need a second for loop that goes through every single subject, and then we're going to need another for loop for every single term in that subject for that student. Okay, having knowing sorry, knowing that, we are going to have to then work with 3 for loops. Now, yesterday, when I worked with my for loops, I declared my for loops this way. So I had for st as integer. So instead of having to declare st, su as integers in a separate line, what I'm now doing is I'm incorporating the declaration of the type for that variable inside my for loop instead. And this is really up to you. You can either do it this way or you can do it in the way I'm going to show you now. But please try and keep it consistent, because this is not, when you write your semester test, it is not an opportunity for you to show off all the different ways you know how to do something. Rather keep it consistent and say this is what you're comfortable with, and preferably keep it that way. So I'm just showing you the alternative, and it's up to you to decide whether you want to do it this way or how Mr. Libia likes doing it, which is this way. All right, so I'm going to have st for my students, su for my subjects, and then I'm going to have t as integer for my terms. And because I know there are going to be 3 for loops, because we've established this, I am going to have for st is equal to 1 to n students, and I'm going to have for su is equal to 1 to n subjects, and then finally, inside this for loop, I'm going to have for t is equal to 1 to n terms, next t. Now, please note that this is very different from how we list our for loops when we labeled our grid. You will remember that when we labeled our grid, the 2 for that we used were separate, whereas over here, our for loops are inside each other. And the reason why our for loops need to be inside each other is because you need to remember that for each student, one student has a number of subjects, and each subject has a number of terms. This, however, did not work on that principle. This worked on, oh, I'm interested in displaying things on my grid, and I'm only, at this point in time, only interested in displaying all the students on every single row. So that is why there's no subjects involved in when I label my grid for displaying every single student in this particular instance, and that is why it is in a separate for loop of its own. Whereas this particular line only involves displaying subjects across multiple columns on a single row, and that's why, again, it is in a separate for loop of its own. So this one, however, we now put for loops inside each other. Please remember to do that. As I said, if you put this for loop inside that for loop, you're going to get the right output. Okay, just give me a minute. You'll get the right output, but you will get the marks deducted because you are unnecessarily displaying your subject more times than needed in your UJ grid. All right, so I did have a question. Do you want to put your hand up again so I can let you speak up? Yes. Yes, you can speak up. M. Shakomba, please speak up. We can't hear you. Sorry, we can't hear you. Can you try maybe speak up? We can see that your mic is unmuted, but I cannot hear you. Can anybody else hear M. Shakomba? Nobody's typing it. M. Shakomba, can you please just type your query? Can you type your query out because nobody else can hear you? Okay, so M. Shakomba, if you can just type your query, I will read. Yeah, you see, nobody can hear you. Please just type your query and I will get to your query now. Okay, so while he is typing, he or she is typing their comment, please, I'm going to continue with the code. All right, so over here, we are going to read in the input. Now, it's important that you put the input code in the right places. Okay, in the right for loop, because as you know from previous examples, if you put this input of student numbers and surname and initials in the wrong place, it will mean that your user has to put in more information multiple times. So that's like saying if we put student number inside our innermost loop and there are 2 students. Okay, M. Shakomba cannot hear anything. Let me just respond, close the browser, and reopen and connect again. Okay, so what I'm going to let's continue with my part of the answer questions here. So if we were to read in the student name here, okay, students SUST dot subjects, let's say like surname, let's go, is input box. What is the name of student %C string SU? If we put our line of code here, what will happen is we will find out that we actually ask the surname of one student multiple times. Now, what we mean by that is if we have specified 2 students and each student has 3 subjects and each subject has 2 terms, we would ask for the surname of our student 2 times 3 times 2 times. And remember, if there's only 2 students, how many times do we need to ask for a surname? We only ask for 2 surnames, 1 for each student. So that is why it's very important that you put these lines of code in the right for loops. And how you know that something needs to be in the right for loop is you go back to this table or you go to your design and you check to see what the field actually belongs to. So we know student number, surname, initials, these three fields belong to a student. That's what it says. Each student has the following fields. And so we know that these three lines of code, these three fields which have information, must go into the for student loop. Nowhere else, just only inside the student loop. So if we then look at the information for each grade 12 subject that belongs to the student, we can then see that, oh, the subject name must belong to a subject. Now, you might think that the marks per term also belongs to the subject, and that is kind of true, but you see that there's the keyword per term. What that means is this marks happens to have multiple values in the subject record structure. And so when we want to read in the marks for each term, for each subject, that means the marks need to be input for every term, and that means a third for loop. So going back here, I'm going to take this line of code and I'm going to put it in here with students. So it is inside the student for loop only. And the other thing you can check to see if this is now in the right place or not is that little trick I mentioned to you in the last few lectures. So if you look at line 56, look at which variables, input variables which for loop variables do you see? Now you can see I made a mistake there, SU, okay, but let's keep that there. Let's keep that mistake there to see what the impact of putting that mistake there is in this particular line of code. But what I want you to do is I want you all to come up with a theory of what you think will happen if I accidentally use the wrong for loop variable in this line of code. All right. Okay, I've got a query here in practical 8, question G. Calculate and display the name of the artist who is the best. This is the artist with the highest number of total hits. Field 4 is platinum hits. I'm going to have to take a look at practical 8 question. If you can please post that on Discord, I will answer your question, J. Oliver. All right. Otherwise, let's see if we've got time at the end of the session of this lecture, and then I will try and answer that question when I have that in front of me. Okay. So if we then continue, we can say students st dot and then the other things we have to read in were the student number and the initial. So that's the one thing I need to do. Let's put in the student number instead. Student number is equal to cint input box. What is the student number of student? And this time I'm going to put in the correct student number variable. All right. But notice this. This is the correct line 56. And if you look at the two for loop variables that are in use, it's that one and it is that one. And you can see that both of these st is inside a for st loop. That's why we know that, oh, this line of code should be only inside a for st loop. Whereas if we think the line of code is actually correct, we know that this is incorrect, but if we think this is incorrect, then what will happen is you can see that according to this, there's an ST and there's an SU, meaning this line of code specifically should be in here instead. Okay, so it should be in here instead if we were following the principle, but we're not going to do that. We're going to keep that here because we now think this is correct because we didn't pick up that this says SU instead of ST. And then we've got students st dot initials is equal to input box. What are the initials of student and C string st. Okay, so those are the three fields that we need to input for the student, for each student. But now we must also get the subject name for each subject of that student and the marks per term for that subject of that student. So in subjects, because remember each subject has a subject name. So we go students st dot subjects, And let's make another mistake here. Let's say we're going to keep it as students subjects st instead is equal to input box. What is the name of subject and C string su of student st. All right. Let's see, what am I missing here? Okay, you can see that I'm missing. Oh, right. Okay, so I left it here, and it's clearly a mistake. Now, what I just want to discuss this. Why is this a mistake? Well, we all know that it's because each subject actually has a subject name, and that's why it's complaining here. But the reason what I want to discuss this particular error here is that people make this mistake often, and so please note the error message that it actually gives. Now here it says that the value of string cannot be converted to, and please note at the bottom there, value of type string cannot be converted to FRM UJPS.subject_rec. Now, what that effectively means at the bottom is that you have on the right an input box which returns a string. But what is on the left is they're saying that what's on the left is something of type subject_rec. And if you think about subject_rec is an entire record structure. It isn't just a string. It is a record structure comprising a string, an array of integer, and double. And that should then, if you see this and you're not sure what the error is, you should then realize, oh, put your mouse over it and you see, oh, there, that final line of code is reminding me that actually what's on the left is not just a string, it's actually a whole record structure. And because it's a whole record structure, it means that I have, oops, forgotten to mention a name field instead. All right, because remember, a record structure has of type subject actually has a dot name, has a dot marks, and a dot arrow. Okay, and then finally I'm going to have students st.subjects su. I'm going to do it correctly now, and I'm going to have marks t because it is for term 1, 2, 3, 4 is equal to cint input box. What is the mark? I'm going to leave it as that now, but normally what would be ideal is that you actually indicate mark c string t so that we can see it's a mark so and so of subject so and so of which current student. Okay. Right. Yes, please ask your question, AY Suppler. You can speak up. Please speak up. Just unmute your mic and speak up. I can't quite hear you. Can anyone hear? Hello? Oh, no. Okay. I don't know why nobody can speak up today. I think there might be an activity issue. All right, just please type your question in the text box. I think that will make it easier for all of us for today. Maybe can anyone just try and speak up on their microphone? Okay, don't everyone scream, but like someone speak up. Okay. Yeah. Hello? Yes, I can hear some people. So I think it's a connectivity issue. Okay, I think it's a connectivity issue then. If you find that you cannot speak up, then I think the most immediate thing is please just type your question in the text box and we will get back to you. All right. Okay. So look, there are a number of errors in my code here right now, but I am specifically going to keep that here. All right. The first one I want to look at is this one, which is what is the name of the student? Well, what is the name of the student? because it's using an incorrect index there. And then the second problem is over here, where instead of using a subject SU for subject, I've now accidentally put ST in for subjects instead. I'm going to run the program, and we're going to see what the effect of that error is. All right, do these two errors lead you to lose marks in your practical? Absolutely. But one error is more damaging than the other. And so I just want to point these things out to you, that when you're busy writing this code in your second semester test or in your exam, please, I know that you're thinking, oh, same old or something, but try and concentrate on what you're doing when you're typing your code so that it doesn't cause an error. So what I want to do is I want to now make it 3 students, 2 subjects, and let's make it 2 terms for now. I'm going to set up my program, and you can see that the code from yesterday is well, from what it looks like, it's correct. I said there are 3 students, there are 2 subjects per student, and you can see that there are 3 rows here, and there are 2 subjects, and then there's the best subject, average mark, and a rating columns. All right, and now it's down to us capturing the data. This is where we know things may go wrong. And it says, what is the student number of student 1? Because that's the first thing we ask, what is the student number? So I'm going to put in 1 there because, hey, you know, doesn't matter. All right. Then it says, what is the name of student 0? You see, this is the error that we were talking about earlier. We said instead of using ST there, we're using SU. And now you see that this is more of a, it's not a train smash error, but it's also not nice, because who's student 0? I don't know what student 0 is, but okay, fine. Let's say you're desperate, the program hasn't crashed, so let's continue and see what happens. All right, so the name of student 0 is A1. We're going to go A1 for student 1, and it says, what are the initials of student 1? And let's just put in a small a there, and then it says, what is the name of subject 1 for student 1? And we go, okay, that is AA1, that is the name of subject 1. And then it says, what is the mark? And then I'm going to say the person got 85. And then what is the mark? And remember, each subject has 2 terms, so I'm going to put in the second mark for that subject. And then the next thing is, what is the name of subject 2 for student 1, which again is still working correctly because each student has 2 subjects. So I'm going to go A, B1 maybe. And what is the mark? I'm going to put in 10 and 10. Right? What is the student number of student 2? Okay, so we go, okay, that makes sense. Everything looks fine so far. We've managed to enter 2 marks for 2 subjects for student 1. So that seems fine. But remember, don't test your data up to the first one and go, oh yes, everything looks fine. You need to run the entire course of your data, because now let's see what happens. Okay, so what is the student number of student 2? And let's put in 2 there, and then we say, what is the name of student 3? Can you see the problem now? We went from student 0 for the first student to suddenly now it's student 3. And the reason for that is because we accidentally used the value SU. Now SU, for the first time, when we run this first student, SU still does not have a value. So it asks, what is student 0? But having run the end subjects for loop at least once now, the final value of SU had become the value 3, which is the reason why it's now asking for student 3. So this, again, your programs will still run, it's fine, but it is a bit confusing. Now we went from student 0's name to student 3's name, but not an issue. All right, so we just got B, and what are the initials of student 2? I'm going to put it as B. What is the name of subject 1 of student 2? B. What is the mark? 90, 20. And then what is the name of subject 2? B2, let's say. 3, 3. Okay, and then what is the student number of student 3? And again, this is Okay, 9, this is student number 3, and then it says, what is the name of student 3? Now it makes sense, but conveniently only because we have 3 subjects per, well, 3 is the value after the for loop. Okay, so what is the name of student 3? I go you, and maybe you again, and this is where my program crashes. So as I've mentioned, the error can be very detrimental to your code. And the reason why we're now having this error is because it says the system index out of bound exception error. It tried to access a subject that doesn't exist, because remember you're using ST3. Okay, how many subjects do we have per student? We have 2 subjects per student. We do not have 3 subjects per student. So what's happening now is our program is crashing because there are 3 students, 2 subjects each, but because subjects is making use of ST, which is the value supposedly only used for students, it is borrowing that same value that happens to be 3. So now what's happening in this line of code only towards the end is it's trying to access a 3rd subject for student 3. So please, ladies and gentlemen, when you are, if you test your code, make sure you test your code extensively, in the sense that have 2 sets of test data, where if I now press stop and we go back to our form, you'll remember that I said I'll use 3 students, 2 subjects, and 2 terms. If you want to test your program correctly, you would have a second set of test data where you said 2 students, 3 subjects, and however many number of terms. And the reason why you do this is if you had only worked with 2, 3, 2, you would not have picked up the error that I have made here. That is why with test data, have 2 different sets, but make sure that your dimensions vary in terms of either 2, 3, 2 and then 3, 2, 3 for this reason. So I'm going to change this back to SU, which is the correct thing. And over here, I'm going to change it to ST because we are talking about students instead. So at this point in time, does anyone have questions? I don't see anyone raising their hand in the participants window, and I'm not getting any activity in the chat window. So I'm going to continue with my code. All right, so to calculate the student subject averages, the idea there is we're going to take every single mark that is in the marks array, and we're going to work out the average of that particular mark. So if you think of your subject, okay, you are the student, you have a number of subjects. For each of those subjects, you have a number of marks from each term. We're going to take all those term marks to work out your average for your subject, i.e. science or maths or English or so on. So in order for us to do that, what do we need to look at? We need to look at marks that belong to subjects that belong to students. So what I will do is, again, I'm going to declare ST, SU, as well as T as my integer variables, and I'm going to have to use 3 for loops. So for ST is equal to 1 to n subjects, and some of you might get really lazy, and please don't do this. So some of you might go, oh, you know what? These are the 3 for loops that I've got, so I'm going to copy and paste that into here. Don't do that. Rather type again, even if you feel that your typing is not the fastest in the world. Okay, and you can see I made a mistake here already, but it should be n students and then n subjects, and then inside the n subjects there should be a for t is equal to 1 to n terms. All right, next t. And again, when we work out the average, it is a matter of finding out where to put your code. Now we know that in order for us to work out an average, we need to add all the marks together in a array and then divide it by however many marks there are in order to get the average of the subject. So over here, just before we start navigating through every single term marks of that subject in that student, we need to declare a variable called total or something along the lines of type integer, and total we must remember to initialize to 0. Okay, if you don't remember to initialize to 0, this can cost you about 2% in your semester mark. Your program will still run, but there's going to be some errors as a result. Okay, then total must be the sum of students st dot subjects su dot marks. All right, so it's that we're just gonna marks t. So we're adding up every single mark belonging to a certain subject for a certain student. Once we've done that, we exit the for loop. This is important that you exit because you're done going through every single mark in that for that subject for that student, and now we can say students st dot subjects su dot aver is equal to total divided by n terms because we added so many marks. Now some people I find do this. They put this line of code inside the for loop. Will you get the right answer? Yes. Will you get 100% for your code? No. Because remember that rule that I mentioned. If you look at this particular line of code, which for loop variables do you see? You see st and you see su. Do you see a t for loop variable in the statement? No. So why is it inside the for t loop? It doesn't make sense. But if you have to have a more elaborate answer other than you looking at the code literally, well, think of it this way. You only want to divide your total by the number of terms once for every subject. You don't want to keep dividing it inside the for loop. You don't want to add a total and then go, okay, the sum is now 100 divided by 3 if there are 3 terms. Okay, the next subject was 100 plus 90. So you add those up and you divide by 3. You only need to divide once. All right. Now the question I also want to point out, want to bring up here is how many of you think that there will be an issue if you take this line, these 2 lines of code, and you put it up here instead? And I would like you to consider looking at that. Okay, for the reason that if you put this line of code up here instead, at least total, up here, or here, or, okay, there, we put it there earlier, and we know that that is correct. And we know that's correct because I'm telling you to put it there, all right? But I want you to consider what will happen if you put the total there instead, or if you put it outside the for loop of all places. So please experiment with this. Okay, now I don't have the time to do that now, but try that so you can see. Yes, Java mentions that the total needs to reset to 0 on the next run through the for loops, and the total is only initialized once for one subject, pretty much. So if you, depending on where you put it, if you put it up there just before the subject for loop, or if you put it before the student, you're going to find that the total of the marks is going to accumulate to the point that, you know, by the time you get to the last student, the last student's last subject will be this amazing average that might actually be above 100%. And I think if you see that, you should realize realistically, can anyone have a subject mark, a grade 12 subject mark that is, congratulations, 375%? Okay, and so that should realistically tell you that something is going wrong here. All right, so over here we worked out the subject averages, but in addition to working out the subject averages, we also have to display the subject averages. So I'm going to have a display, and we're going to put in that it is st because it is row st, column su, and now because it is a string, it is a double value, we're going to format it. So we say students st dot subjects su dot aver, and maybe if we have it up to 2 decimal places or whatever, your semester test will provide instructions as to how many decimal places you should put it up to. On this note, please note that there is a difference between us telling you display at exactly 2 decimal places and up to 2 decimal places. So if it were exactly 2 decimal places, then your format should look like this. Technically, if it is up to 2 decimal places, then it should be this instead, because up to means that you can display up to so many spaces. But if it says exactly 2 places, 2 decimal places, then you need to put 00 to say that, listen here, it is not optional. If the answer is 1.50, it should not display 1.5. It must put in 1.5 with a 0 there, because it must display exactly 2 decimal places at that point. All right. Then moving on, calculate the student best grade 12 subjects. Now, when we work this out, this technically is for you guys the most complex calculation in any problem. And so if you think about the name of the best, well, here we see that it says best subject is an integer. Okay, so this is rather important. You notice it says here the best subject is an integer that has been calculated. However, question 5 says for each student, calculate, store, and display the name of the grade 12 subject that scored the highest mark. All right, so the idea is it says that you must calculate and store. Okay, this is a bit of an error with the code, but I should have worded it correctly. So I would say that this question should say for each student, calculate, store the, and if you look at this table here, it says best subject needs to be an integer. All right, we're going to retain that. So it's for each student, calculate, store the index of the best grade 12 subject that was the highest mark, and then display the name of this grade 12 subject that scored the highest mark. So in terms of display, we want you to display the subject name, but when we want you to store the information, we want you to store the index, because it will be an integer that we want you to save. All right, so this is a little bit more complex than the previous questions that are in along the lines of finding a maximum. And so in order for us to find to display the name of the best subject, we need to consider, well, what would that be? We need to consider the average mark of the subjects, right? So do we need to look at terms again? No, we don't. So over here, I'm going to have dim, ST, and SU only. Right, we're not interested in T anymore because we've done those calculations. We are not interested in the marks per term. We are interested in the average mark for each subject of each student. So we're going to have a for ST loop to go through each student, because every student must have a best mark. And then we're going to have a for loop that goes through each subject. Now, before I do that, I need to remember that the algorithm for finding a minimum or maximum in my array is I need to initialize the maximum. I need to initialize some maximum value, and the maximum value is going to be max as double. All right, and the reason why I need to use double is because I am comparing averages, and averages are a double value. So max is going to be initialized to students st.subjects 1, because we're saying the first subject for now with its average mark is the maximum. On that note, I will also say students st.subjects students dot best subject. Let's find best subject. Best subject is equal to 1. All right. And let me see, best subject, oh, I declared it as a string, which is incorrect. I should have made it an integer. All right, okay, so best subject is an integer. All right, and now I may begin my for loop. So for SU is equal to 2 to n subjects, and the reason why I can start at 2 is because I've already looked at the first subject. And inside there, as usual, you need to have an if statement that says if the max is less than students st.subs su dot aver, then max is equal to students st dot subjects su dot aver, and you must remember to update the index, which is students st dot best subject. And remember, where are we? Which subject are we looking at the moment? We are looking at SU. We are looking at SU subject, and that is how we find the maximum location, because remember, we are interested in knowing what is the index of the best subject. Now, this means we need the maximum variable to keep track of what the maximum value is so we can compare. But we need to keep track of where this maximum value is so that we know that when we are done with this for loop, so in other words, we have looked at every single subject for the student now, and we're ready to display the name of the best subject for the student. We can display it by saying students st, and it is now s subjects plus 1 because it's in the column after the last subject. And when we display, remember, we are interested not in where this best subject is. We want to know the name of the best subject. So you need to go students st dot subjects, and now we need to know which subject's name. And which subject's name happens to be a location. We need to know a location. And where have we stored a location? We stored a location in here. So we're going to take that best location and we're going to insert it inside the brackets for the subject so that we can display the name of a specific subject, that subject of the student being this location that we have just calculated for the best subject. All right. Now, this leaves us with 3 minutes before the end of the session, so we won't be able to move on to calculate the student rating. So the last two questions, questions 6 and 7, we will have to do on Monday. So let me now instead quickly look at practical 8 and answer your question. So let me quickly go to practicals, practical 8. Right. And your question specifically was in practical 8G. Okay. Calculate and display the name of the artist who is the best. This is the artist with the highest number of total hits, which is field 4. Yes. Okay. So what effectively we're trying to do here is we're trying to find the maximum. So remember, each artist, you have an array of artist names, and each artist has, we've worked out the number of platinum hits, which have been calculated in question E, and now we want to get the name of that artist, and it will be a single answer. So if you look at this particular question here, you won't display this question G in a grid. You would rather display this in a text box because there's only one single artist with the highest number of total hits. And just so that you know what you've questioned here is, it's very similar to the code that we have just described here. The only difference is that with this one, we are finding the names for multiple students, whereas in this practical question, we are looking at the overall artist array, and we're trying to find the maximum in this overall artist array. So, J. Oliver, just take into consideration what we have done here, this particular piece of code, and try and apply it to your particular set of circumstances in question 8 instead. All right. So, are there any questions before we call it a long weekend? Well, for some of you, because some of you have the tutorial with Mr. Labia later today, And if you haven't attended any of the tutorials, please do attend this afternoon's tutorial with Mr. Labia. He is going through how you create test data, and this test data will be very important for you ensuring that you've got comprehensive test data that tests for issues like the one we picked up earlier today. Right. So any questions? Nobody wants to speak up? Anyone wants to speak up? Yes, RJ Zita, please try and ask your question. Just remember to unmute your mic.
Yeah, I wanna ask a question concerning practical 8, because somewhere it says when a value is a double, we must format it to 3 decimal places. But in the practical, when I look at the requirements, I don't see a place where we'll be getting a double value.
Well, if you say, look, it says where double values must be displayed. So if you don't see double values being used anywhere, then it just means you don't have to display anything. It's just that is that statement there is actually there to cover all possibilities. If there are decimal values to be displayed, then you should. Because as you said, it just says where double values must be displayed. So if you don't see any double values here, then you don't have to. All right.
All right, so that statement doesn't specifically mean that there will be a double or somewhere.
No. It doesn't necessarily mean that. Okay, so there was a query from J. Oliver. Are we calculating the maximum total hits or the platinum hits? Or are we calculating the artist with the greatest total hits or platinum hits? So it is with it's field 4. So field 4 is the number of platinum hits. Right, because remember if you look at the greatest total hits, well, the greatest total hits, remember here, an artist has a number of total hits. So that total hits then contributed to some calculation that led to question 4. So if you see here, it actually says compare based on field 4. So it would be based on that value, not the total hits there. Right. Also, the total hits here is for one particular album for that artist. Whereas here, the question basically says for each, of all the artists, if we look at every single artist, please look at the number of platinum hits that each of the artists actually made. And if they made, say, 10, the other one had 3, then you know that the first artist is the one that has the most number of platinum hits. All right, so I think that has answered everyone's question. RJ Zita, you have another question? Yes, please ask your question. Do you have a question?
Just, Prof, those of you that have
Yes.
the tutorial with me later on, please do download it. If you haven't gone through it yet, please go through it and try and do as much of it as possible. It will be advantageous for when we actually start the tutorial.
Okay, RJ Zita is saying that total hits are for albums and we can't use them for finding the best artist. That is correct. But that's why I'm saying that you need to use field 4, which is the number of platinum hits that each artist has. But in order for us to work out the number of platinum hits, you would have to then consider looking at the total hits based on their albums to work. So in order to get question E, to find out the value of question E, the field 4, you need to look at the answer that you've calculated in getting the answer for field 3, Roman numeral 3. All right. Okay. That's fine. I think that is all the questions for now. Mr. Labia will then see those of you who have not attended the tutorial yet this week and last Friday. Please do attend. It is just before this long weekend, and we really want you to all be up to on the same page here. So please do yourselves a favor and attend Mr. Labia's tutorial later today. All right. Thank you very much. And for those of you who are done, please enjoy your long weekend. Take a break. Tomorrow is Workers' Day, so please work. All right. And see you on Monday. All right. Goodbye.